It's okay. Getting used to it, I guess.
Yeah. I found it nice to, just because I have a kid, it's nice with cutting out like commuting.
Yeah.
But
not the same thing, but we got a cat earlier in the month, so
yeah.
it was a kitten, so that was good. So the timing wasn't terrible.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta be lucky as well with those things.
Yeah.
So
however, the bad thing is my internet went out on Monday. There was a really bad storm here in New York, and we just got it back this morning, so the guy came in, but that was like a terrible 2 days.
Yeah, you can't even blame it on the employer, kind of. That's the worst part.
Yeah. So we were stranded without anything for a while, but it's fine, we're good. We're all back.
Yeah, my internet went out this morning from like just because we had electricians here, and they ended up cutting the power. And I have this old router, which is, I don't know why I keep using this, but it's an old kind of Linux box.
Yeah.
That I've set up myself, but not enough to actually know my way around it. And for some reason, it started taking, like an hour or so to start after it reboots.
Oh, wow.
Which is problematic when you work with digital stuff.
Yeah.
So, so I had a rough morning as well, trying to dial in on my phone to all the meetings. And I also currently work with like video streaming, so I usually need lots of internet for that to work.
Yeah.
It's not the best.
Gotta get a new router.
Yeah. Yeah, I got it. I don't know why I keep doing those things. Okay, so let me just post the link to the meetup here in as many places as I can find. Let's see when people start joining. I'll go ahead and share my slides again here now. And we'll wait a little bit here for people to join in. So I will repeat this in a little while, but there's a delay between this Zoom meeting and the stream on YouTube, just so you know. So there's like I think it's maybe a 30-second delay or something like that. So occasionally, the feedback loop won't be great for the chat. Getting lost here with all my windows.
Is there a way we could see the chat, or just open it on YouTube?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, open it on YouTube. Yeah, that's the best way, I'd say. Gonna wait a few more minutes. Oh, there we go. I think Joe is joining as well. Hello, Joe. Audio's connecting. Hello. Hey. Welcome. we're just waiting a few minutes here for people to join in on the YouTube stream, and then we'll get started. See if there's anywhere I've forgotten to post this. So I think people are starting to join up. Yeah, so I think that's long enough. Let's get started. So hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Relay Meetup. This is our second meetup for all time, and this time we have an episode where we'll talk a lot about both learning Relay through the Relay Workshop, which is a project that Sibelius is going to introduce, and then also about defer and stream, the directives that you've probably heard of or read about in GraphQL, which is, at least to me personally, very interesting. We'll do a small round of introductions here, just us that are on the stream. But before that, I'll just mention that this is streamed live and also recorded on YouTube, and there's a delay just between this Zoom meeting and YouTube, which is at 20 to 30 seconds, just so you know. So if we don't reply immediately, it's not because we're rude, it's because there's a delay. I will also keep track of the chat continuously. So if you have questions or anything, just go ahead and write in the YouTube chat, and I'll try and pick it up as we go along. Also, for those of you that are interested, there is a Discord for this meetup that you can join afterwards, where at least I'll hang around for a while, and you can chat or voice chat or even video chat if you want to about stuff around Relay. And finally, so if you have any ideas for presenting things here, could be anything. Don't really have to be presentations. It could be live coding or anything at all. Go ahead and reach out to me at Relay Meetup on Twitter. So I guess a short introduction of us. My name is Gabriel. I've been using Relay on and off in various capacities for, well, I guess since Classic. I also work at a place called Arison in Sweden, which is a consultancy. And yeah, that's pretty much me. So I guess Sibelius, would you like to go next and just say a few words about yourself?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sibelius. I'm from Brazil here, and I work at Entria. We are a venture builder, and we build like we have kind of different companies here in our company. So we have instant payment solutions here. That's the new product, OpenPix. We also have Feedback House. That's our age management system for companies. And I also create like a React Brazil community that has like more than 30,000 developers there talking about like React and all related stuff. And I think that's it. So I've been using Relay since in the beginning of it, like Classic, and I think 2016. So when I saw Relay at first, the first video, like I just saw like was kind of like was gonna change like the way we develop apps, and did it change us? For sure. Like modern is great, like the new hooks is really great API. So I think I made a Relay workshop to make sure like everybody understand all these concepts that Relay has. I think that's it.
Awesome. Rob?
I'm Rob from First Dibs in New York. It's a online marketplace for very high-end furniture, jewelry, art, fashion, stuff like that. We've been using Relay for a while. Definitely since Classic, probably like not too long after it was first open source, and been working with Liliana on trying to get defer and stream in the standardized in the GraphQL spec.
Awesome. Liliana?
Yeah, similar to Rob, also work at First Dibs over in New York. And yeah, been using Relay at First Dibs pretty much since Relay Classic. Yeah, I guess not much else to add.
Yeah, awesome. And Joe?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for hosting this. So yeah, I'm Joseph Luna at Facebook. Been at Facebook for about 6 years now, working on and off on Relay for most of that time. Yeah, been working on Relay since before Relay Classic was a thing that people knew existed. Yeah, happy to share insights. It's Defer has had a long journey, so it's fun to see it coming to the open source spec.
Nice, and thank you for joining. The agenda for today is I will go through a few news items from the Relay community, and then we'll listen to Sibelius introduce the Relay workshop. After that, we'll have a short break, and then we'll talk about Defer and Stream, both from First Dibs point of view and getting it merged into the spec and whatnot. And then also we'll try and get some info out of Joe from how Facebook is using it and how it's been. Yeah, there's a long journey, like we heard, so that'll be interesting to hear about as well. And yeah, again, afterwards, if anyone wants to hang out and chat about Relay, there's in the Discord that I will post a link for as well. So just a few things that has happened since last time. There was a new Relay release, 10.1.0. It contained a bunch of things. Among other things, it contained a few new store updater directives for inserting nodes into connections and whatnot. I will link to the release notes in the chat as well. It also included some extended support for cache config and also support for React 17 and a bunch of other stuff as well. And there's, I don't know, Joe, do you want to comment anything on? I've peeked at the commits lately, and you seem to be working a lot with the LSP. Is there anything that you can share anything about?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's too much. This was a point release, and so there's not a lot of in the release itself. Yeah, we're definitely working on an LSP implementation based on the new Rust Relay compiler. And so that's it's going well. Some exciting features. It's kind of it's very for a team that is largely focused on infra that does not have a visible UI. It's kind of fun to work on an LSP where you can actually see oh, go-to definition works, and so that's been really exciting. A lot of good progress, but nothing, not quite ready to use. I'm not. I know people have gotten the compiler working in open source. I'm not sure about the IDE. I think there might be a little more necessary before it's usable. But, definitely want to get that to the community when possible.
Yeah, there's a few commit messages that's made me salivate a lot, auto completing. I think the last one was auto completing fields and automatically inserting required arguments and things like that, which is just waiting for that one. That's going to be great. Yep. And a few other things that's happened as well. Meros is a client for reading multi-part responses, which is something that you need in order to work with Defer and Stream. There's a link here that you can check out. It's a really cool library. I will also post all the links again in the YouTube chat. And the last item is GraphQL Helix, which I think is a really cool project. I was going to say framework, but it says utility functions in the repo itself, so I'm going to say that instead. But it's utility functions for building GraphQL servers in Node, and it's a lot about, from what I understand, kind of getting out of your way and just letting you build stuff without having too much opinions. And it also supports different streams. So it's on the theme for this episode as well. So go ahead and check that out. I will post the links momentarily in the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share and let's say Bilius, take it away.
Okay, I'm gonna share now. Try here. That's it. Can you see my screen? Okay, so Relay Workshop is a different kind of workshop because it's open source. You don't see that much stuff like this in open source. So this was built for React Europe. I was gonna present presently in French, I guess, but didn't work out because of COVID stuff. And then I decided to make like open source. And it has like a lot of stuff. It's a monorepo with a lot of utilities and all to make all this working well. It has a lot of exercise here. So you can go to the workshop and then we have like 12 exercise where you can learn a little bit about like relay concepts and how to use the new API hooks. So that's a great way of learning how to use the new relay APIs. Or even if you don't know like the old one, you're just new in relay, want to start like using hooks. This is like great way of learning this. And as open source, I keep like updating this. So 3 hours later, I was updating here. And then sometimes like just show up like different pull requests like this one that's adding like a new exercise here. That's kind of a new API, like using use query loader with like use preload query. So it's great to see like the community like improving the workshop. I think we still need more exercise. So we need like an exercise to add like defer to our app, like to add a string to our app, to add like live queries, how to handle local states with Relay. So it has a lot of stuff. So Relay is really big in the API, what you can do. So we need like more workshop to make sure you can understand. So I started like building this kind of simple social network, very simple here. So you can just create like a new post. You can like here, you can add some comments. Hello. And then I can create a new one. Live. Okay. Then I can just post here. I can just move to the other one. So it's very production ready. You can access the GraphQL here. You can have some queries here. Everything's returning new because I'm not logged in here. So it has some stuff. So I'm gonna show like a little bit how I structure this. So if you wanna run the server, you just type yarn server in the hood, and the web, you're gonna go like yarn web. It's gonna run. It's using like Webpack. So we have fast refresh and all this good stuffs. I'm not using Create React app, so I can be like very close to how Relay works without like using Babel macros. So I'm gonna show here. This is my web store. So I have Relay Workshop here. These packages are kind of general tool that's I use like across all this code and exercise workshops. So Babel handle like Babel configs for everything. Babel app is just the same Babel, but using fast refresh. So you can have fast refresh here on the web. And we have GraphQL here. So we have like a lot of utilities to build GraphQL tools without like too much hassle using GraphQL JS. So it has a lot of utilities here that can help. So we also have Relay. That's kind of some helpers of Relay. Let me check here. So I have this load query because the import export was kind of messed up in the latest release. So I just did like kind of fetch here, because instead of doing this, we have load query inside load query. Sometimes happens, so you just do your way. So use mutation wasn't exported back then when I started one, so I probably could consume it directly from hooks. The same stuff for use subscription, that's similar to the relay code. I have some helpers here, and this route here is very similar or close enough to the implementation of Facebook and the issue tracker, I guess. I think Joe did this one, so it has some stuff to make like relay works well with suspense and all. So you can do code and data fetching at the same time. We have the server here. So we have schema, we define the schema here. And then we have our queries, our mutations, and just one subscriptions. That's not much. We have like the mutations here and subscriptions. And we have like comment, like, load. We have post, user. That's a good way of learning how to implement like a GraphQL.js server. So we also have tests if you want to know how to do like tests using GraphQL. We also have tests on Relay. That's kind of easy using Relay test you choose. Have a UI, that's kind of a tiny design system. Just material UI with style system, tests, helpers. We have the web. The web is this app here. And let's see. And we have routes here. We have all these routes, like route configs, very similar to a way of doing like with Rect route DOM, using like Rect route DOM config. So we have a config of routes. So we have components that suggest resource, so you can eagerly fetch this codes. And then you have the path, is exact or not. You can have like nested routes. That's similar how Remix works. This doesn't work well with Next because you have like just fat routes. So have these routes here, and then the prepare is going to be called when you access this route. So you just fetch the data and the code at the same time. Okay, I think that's it. And we have the load query here. And if you see, you have the load query, and then you have the use per load query here. And that's kind of, you're gonna learn how to use this with this one in one of the exercise. Okay, we have Webpack here. That's a magic Webpack config that just works. It has a lot of Webpack stuff. You just import anywhere you want like this and just works. It's gonna be fast. Okay, so that's kind of the infrastructure of the workshop. And then when you're gonna do the exercise, you need to run the server, and then you go in one of this exercise you want. So the first one is to fetch data using like simple fetch. So you can understand how hard it is to fetch data by yourself. So we have the exercise here. So we have a simple query, and then you need to fetch this query, a list of posts here. And then we have some extras like how to handle error, like if your server just send like an error for you, how you handle like retries, how can you handle pagination here. So the idea is to understand how to fetch a query without using Relay, and then you just gonna learn how to use Relay for this. It's very similar to the way we have here. We have a to-do here, and you're gonna work on this to-do. So for each workshop exercise, you have a to-do that you need to fix. If you struggle too much, you don't know how to solve this, I just made like solutions here, and then you can go back to the solutions that's similar to the workshop here. And then you can just go here and see one of the possible solutions. You can solve this different ways. And we have here, so we are doing like a fetch GraphQL that I create here that's similar to GraphQL examples. So we have the GraphQL URL, it's a post. I just accept it like JSON. I just send like query and variables, and then I get the data from the response JSON. I get the result here. And then I set post. If something goes wrong, I set the error here. It's like this. I use effect to query this data. If you have like watch like the other talks about relay or react, like handler as you fetch is not the best way of doing this. So doing fetch on the component did mount or use effects is not the best way, because you're gonna load first the code and then you're gonna load the data. So it's not the best way. And then you have error handling here in the component instead of using like a error boundary. That's kind of better. And then you just map posts here. You don't have like TypeScript for this here. You can do by yourself, but it's gonna be like much more trouble. Okay, I think that's one workshop exercise. And then we have more. So after this one, you're gonna use like lazy load query. That's not the best one of doing like queries in relay using handlers to fetch, but you can like taste a little bit of relay. We have some notes as well, so I can explain a little bit like of concepts. How can you do setup? How can you configure like the environment here? A little bit about like fetch policies and all, like what is the types? Where do you pass the query, the variables, some options here. I also have some links so you can just dive in. Let me check here. So I also have like to do here. And if you go to the solutions, you're probably gonna have like a much simpler solution. So you just have a usually load query here. You have a type that was generated by relay, and then you just render. So you don't have to worry about like error, because the error boundary is handling this for you, and then you just render posts. So if you check this solution against the other one, the first one, you're gonna check it out. Like it's much simpler. So here you have like two states, one use callback, one use effect, and then you have just one single hook here. I think it's pretty much the same. It's kind of interesting as I made like the workshop. One question, like when I moved to this use fragment one, that's teaches how to use like a use fragment. Let me open the solution. I think it's better. Okay. The solution is not okay. The solution. Let me open the solution here. So one thing that's kind of hard to understand is like fragments. So the post here has a fragment here, and one of the kind of students in the workshop asked me like, why I don't use lazy load query here, right? Why don't I do like use lazy load query here instead of use fragments? And then we just change the solution to use this, and then you can see like much more. If you have like 10 posts, you're gonna see like 10 requests to your backend. And then if you use fragments, you're gonna see just one request. So this is very practical, so you can see like the benefits of using fragments. And I think like we can use it even more, like if you have like variables here on fragments, that's something like GraphQL fragments doesn't have. So Relay just polyfill this for you. And I think that's it. I think this is the basics of the workshop. Let me just comment here. So if you wanna start with the workshop, okay, you just go to the GitHub here, and then you just clone. Let's see, step by step. So just get here, and then you just click here. And then you just clone the workshop. It's cloned here. You're probably gonna run yarn to install all these packages and all. And then you go to the workshop that you wanna handle this. And then we are here. And then every workshop has this copy env, so we have the right env to point out to the right GraphQL. That's your port here. And then you have a start. And then when I do start, I'm gonna start this exercise. Not sure if you need to quit this, let's see. And then the workshop, this exercise is gonna run on this port, and then you can just start hacking and check it out like your solution. So it's very practical. So you just listen, you just read some notes and just figure it out by yourself. I think this is the base of the workshop. And I think the rest is up to the student or to the one like that wants to learn how to do this properly. You need to struggle to learn. That's the only way. So I did learning a lot about how to do like a good workshop with candidates. He just made like some videos and like tutorials and all. So he has really good tips. If you wanna do some kind of great workshop, just watch some videos and all. And then you have this one. This is the workshop. So we don't have posts and all. And then you need to figure out how to get the query and fix this for you. So the exercise is this. So you're probably gonna need to do some kind of fetch here. You can just start simple, like doing some use effect here. And not sure. And then you can try to do. And that's it. That's kind of it. I'm not gonna solve this right now because I don't remember, but that's fine. I think that's it. If you have any doubt about the workshop, just open an issue there or ping me on Twitter. And I think that's it. If you want to improve the workshop, if you want to add like more exercise, if you want to like some live chat, something like this, just talk to me. I think that's it. I think there's a lot of stuff to improve. So we need like defer exercise. We need more about subscriptions. We have one here. Maybe like the new mutations API, like append node and all. I think that's it. Any
You're interested in
questions?
contributions, right?
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, no, this is a really great foundation, I think. It's nice to have something that's both structured and has explanations in it and also solutions. It's always nice to see like how to actually do it as well. So that's great.
Yeah, that's a really great resource. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but I think it was worth.
Yeah, I can imagine, and definitely seems worth it. Yeah, some other folks from the core team were kind of chatting, and they're watching the live stream, and we're remarking that this is really great. So, yeah, it's very cool. And if there's stuff that we can do to support you, let us know, because I can really see this being a really great resource for the community.
Yeah, not sure. Maybe more exercise. I don't know. I think we need to focus like where people are more confusing about relay. I think like fragments is kind of one way of confusion, like paginations, mutations, like how to properly update the store. Yeah, the new APIs.
Yes, things around updating the store would be great for. It's great in a workshop format, just because it's so like you can read about it and read about it and read about it, and you still got to do it yourself to kind of figure out how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
So that would be really. This is great because this is again, like I feel like Relay it's a lot about just doing, and once you do stuff, you kind of figure them out. But there's so many concepts that it's hard to just read about and then be able to sit down and figure everything out. So I think a workshop is a great format.
Yeah, the workshop is great because everything's working already, so you don't need to worry like about setup. So you don't need to worry about like set up the environment and all. Like everything's just on place. You just need to work on one thing at a time. So sometimes like people are trying to learn Relay and then just gave up because Relay compiler is not working, something like this. Or I don't know. I don't know how to configure Babel or environments just doing something weird. I don't know. People just gave up like too early.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of like, you can find code samples of how to do various things in Relay, but it's also very nice when you also get like when it's explained like what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it fits together. So I think that's a great format for that. So let's see if we can. Do you have a list anywhere? But you mentioned the stream and defer and those things. Do you have a list anywhere on the repo or something with like a wish list for exercises you'd like to cover?
Okay, I have a list here. That's another repo that I started. So I was trying to make a course about Relay Modern, but I'm not so good on this. So I just decided like just to share like a lot of slides. So we have a lot of content here about Relay Modern course. That's a lot of, each package is a kind of like a set of slides and videos and all. And then I made here like a list of content that'll be great, like how to use connection. So everybody just struggle with connection for sure. Like connection is very hard because people don't understand like the relay store. That's a normalized store. And then when you understand relay store, that's a key value. How do you fit like connection inside the store? Because connection is not like one value. You have like a group of items. So it's kind of hard to understand how relay store connections in the store and how the filters works. How can you have like one connection or many connections based on the arguments of the connections? So that's kind of hard. So mask or inline are also great. Like if you want to do some kind of analytics and stuff. So I think it's good to understand when to use this.
Don't add mask false.
Yeah, mask false is just old. Yeah, we can just go to inline now. Yeah, line is the new stuff. Okay, and then relay plural when you use this, when you have like plural, when you have like an array, and then maybe data masking. How can you understand like data mask? That's kind of confusing. Why you need data mask? What kind of bugs it gets? I think this one is covered in the workshop. Also this and this. So client schema extensions kind of, these are like some works. Persistent queries. I think this is fine. How to improve your network layer. I think that's kind of fine. It's kind of mutations and all. You can just add these directives. Relay dev tool that will have like the new version, I guess. So we need to teach people how to use like relay dev tools to properly debug the relay store and all this stuff. How to use like type definition, how to properly use like TypeScript. This one is hard one, how you create like node interface and global ID on the server properly. Or fetchable, be good. Use mutation. This client field, not sure if you need to go to this place. So we also have matching model that's not so well documented here. Hooks, that's a lot. How to mock relay, I think that's things okay. New hooks, have live. Maybe we also need.
There's a lot that you could add, but I mean, yeah. I feel like you just like keep going and like getting like further and further into detail on, but it, like at a certain point, like it kind of, what is at live?
Yeah, so yeah, relay has a lot of API that we need to cover, but I don't have so much time, so not sure when I'm gonna do it. So it's gonna be up to the community for now.
Yeah, great community project, I think. Great fit for that. So anyone in the chat have questions? Feel free to ask them. This is great. Could you perhaps? Oh wait, I'll go ahead and link to this as well. This issue or the repo here, because it's nice to see. Link in the chat. There we go. There's that. Nice, excellent to have a list. Just get started working then, I guess. Yeah, so if there aren't any questions, I guess we'll go ahead and thank Sibelius very much for this. And also, we'll take just a short break, 5 minutes or so, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about, I'll go ahead and jump over to the slides, defer and stream. So see you back here in 5.
See ya.
So welcome back. Let's wait another minute or so. Yeah, I guess we'll get started again. Liliana and Rob, you ready?
Yeah. So I have a few slides to just give an overview of what defer and stream are. So
Awesome.
yeah, so defer and stream, they've been talked about for a long time. A lot of people have probably heard of it, and it's been in Relay for a little while now. And Liliana and I've been working with the GraphQL working group to try and get it to be part of the official spec. So the idea is that it can be used to lower latency, because right now you have you make one single request to GraphQL and get one response back when all the data is ready. And defer and stream are ways to tell the server that some of the data is not as high priority as the rest of the data, and that lets you get the most important data sooner. So defer goes on fragments, and it has an if argument, just like skip and include, and also a label, which is a unique identifier that the client can use to identify the response. And so defer is really useful when you have data that's expensive to load. It's not in the critical path of interactivity. You can say, give this to me when it's ready, but everything else, I want it as soon as I can get it. And so just like a quick example, we're going to defer the speaker picture fragment in this query, and we can pretend that picture, for whatever reason, takes a long time to load. So we'll get the first payload when with the speaker name as soon as possible. And when the speaker picture is ready, we'll get another payload with that data. Stream is a similar concept, but you use it on list fields. Has the same arguments for if and label, and also an initial count argument, which will tell the server how many list items should be in the initial payload. So an example for that, we're querying the speaker's list field, ask for initial count of 1. In the first payload, we get the first list item. Then as we get more payloads, we get another payload with each additional list item whenever it's ready. And this is good for a UI where you could only fit a few list items above the fold on your page. So now you don't need to hold up rendering the visible content while the rest of the page is loading. So the response format, so we can get multiple payloads from a single GraphQL query now. There's some new fields. There's the label field, which is just directly passed through from the label argument that goes on the directives. And the path, which will tell you where in the GraphQL response the data fits into. And then a has next field, which will tell you if an additional payload is expected. So you'll keep getting has next true until the last one should have has next false. And you don't need to use WebSockets. You can use a standard HTTP connection with chunk transfer encoding. And this lets the server keep the connection open and send payloads through the connection when they're ready. And then the client could re-render each time it gets a payload. So where we're at right now is that we're publishing official releases experimental releases of both GraphQL.js and Express GraphQL under the experimental stream defer tag. So you can add that to your package.json to try it out. I have a client library, fetch multi-part GraphQL, which you can use to parse it. It fits in nicely with your Relay network layer. And pretty much the working group wants to get feedback from the community on this before going forward with standardization. So you can go to this issue on GraphQL.js if you've used it and let us know how it's going, looking for any feedback or any kind of improvements we can make before everything gets standardized. And then how it works with Relay is you can put defer on a fragment spread, and that will cause the component that uses that fragment to suspend. And so then you can wrap that with a React suspense component for your fallback. And it fits really nicely in with React suspense. Relay also has stream connection, which is pretty nice. And it's like a shortcut for you put a stream connection argument on a connection field, and that will get transformed into a stream directive on the edges in that connection and a defer inline fragment around page info. And now if your server needs to load all the data to know if there is a next page, it's not going to block loading the edges. So they can come in independently. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So how's the process been around getting this into the spec?
Yeah, it's been good. We're working with a few people from Facebook, some other people here and there. They've been helping us out a lot. Liliana had most of it implemented way back in like December of last year. We've been using it we've been using defer on prod a bunch in many iterations, even before we went with this approach. Yeah.
I know this is Relay JavaScript focused, but in the working group, there's 2 individuals working on getting different stream in the .NET GraphQL implementation, as well as the Java one. Again, just to confirm that this is definitely the direction we want to go before everything makes it into the specification.
Interesting. So I guess the best way to help out is to just try it in your own projects.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Give any feedback. Yeah, it's really nice. And how are you typically using it in production? Because you said you're using defer, at least some, and then you've experimented with stream as well. So what type of UI would you typically use defer for, or what type of content?
Yeah, so for defer specifically, we have it working in our header. So we're deferring some information to get some information for our analytics. Yeah, again, some other information that isn't as critical, depending on like whether our user has notifications. But yeah, just generally information that it's a little slower than everything else on the page, but isn't as critical.
Cool. So can you comment anything on, because I guess before defer, in those cases, you must have refetched manually, I guess, or just delayed fetching?
Yeah, we either took the hit, so it just made that query much slower, that refetch query it's usually things related to like user-specific information, or we would essentially create a separate query and trigger it after like the main query, the query with the more important information, and then this other one gets kicked off once that one completes. So now you have like your slower fields taking even longer because they're part of this separate query that gets fired off. Yeah, after the more important information. So yeah, it makes things worse, but you get your critical fields much quicker. So yeah, defer kind of splits all those pain points, and you kind of get the best of both worlds there.
Yeah,
I see the question in the chat that's instead of streaming and defer, why not 2 different queries? What are the advantages of stream and defer there? So if the data is like totally independent, you can just send off 2 queries in parallel, and that's fine. But if you need data from the first query as an input for the second query, then you need to wait for the whole round trip for the first one before you could even start sending the second query. Whereas defer, the server is already processing that, and it just is, if you're waiting for the whole round trip, that deferred data is going to be slower than if you're using defer. I think I said that correctly.
I guess also the developer experience around using defer compared to having multiple queries is also much nicer.
Definitely personal preference, but I find that it's much easier to just add a defer directive than having to maintain multiple queries, especially over time. Like your code base gets much larger, more complex, and then now you have these multiple queries firing either simultaneously or one right after the other, or having a directive is, in my opinion, much easier to maintain over time.
Yeah. Also, I was playing around with defer a while back, and also like partial rendering with the new experimental APIs, and that almost felt like classic. Like it was able to partially render views with stuff from the store, and also deferring things. That was really nice. Like the good parts from classic was really cool.
I think it works well with suspense. So the kind of idea being if you think about when you're designing your UI. You're like, okay, well, I want, this like header, really important, like, like, let's say you're looking at a person's profile page on Facebook, as just to pick like an example. Like you probably, it might be nice to show the background image, the person's profile photo, and their name like really quickly. Or if you're an e-commerce site, to like show like the photo and the title of the thing really quickly, right? Like any kind of like, everyone has like detail pages that have these like super important information they want to show on top, and then there's like all the extra information. And even though that extra information might actually be really important, like, I don't know, like you probably want to put how much does this thing cost, but like an item description, a person, like more information about a person, it's still really important, but you can show something without waiting for that. And so it's kind of natural to just have like layers of like, here's, you have your like super critical above fold content, and then some suspense boundaries. And then within those, you're like, well, actually this information is like even less important, so put another suspense boundary there. And like everywhere you have a suspense boundary, you put a defer, and you just kind of naturally works out. And the way that Relay handles that is once we get to a fragment where we're missing data, and we know that we're fetching a query that is expected to fulfill that, then we'll suspend. And so if you've deferred that fragment, we go to try to render it. And if the data is there, great, we'll render. If it turns out that it's missing, we'll suspend at that point. And so we kind of suspend as far down the tree, like the most specific point that we can, which means that, if you've deferred that, we'll kind of suspend there. But I think it pairs pretty well.
Yeah. And also, I guess suspense being the main thing there, where it gives you such control as compared to before with, okay, this time I maybe want to let more things render before I show it all, for instance. And it's just about moving suspense boundaries now rather than restructuring your entire UI, more or less.
Yeah, but I think the one thing that is probably important to note is like the way that our APIs work. We don't have an API for checking. Like, I think we don't really expose like a way to say like, is this component's data pending or not, right? We can see like, you can check if the entire query is still pending, but we basically rely on suspense as our way of saying, we're just going to try and render it, and if data is missing, we'll suspend. And so I think if you're using defer and you want to try it with Relay, I would actually encourage like trying out the experimental React release and enabling concurrent mode and suspense, just so that you can see that working, because I think that's really when you start to see it all fit together and see the whole picture.
Yeah, that's the one thing. If you start, especially working with an existing code base, you might have to do a little bit of refactoring. Like in our case, we had some fields specifically that were slow that we had to like refactor to now have that in a component, so then we could defer that fragment and then get suspense to work correctly. So just a little bit restructuring your code, but still pretty straightforward to start using.
Yeah, it's good.
So you transitioned to hooks now at First Tips, or partially or fully, or yeah?
A little bit experimental, but we're still using kind of traditional fragment containers.
Yeah. Nice.
We didn't jump all the way in. I think we're just using them where we wanted to defer stuff.
So there's a few. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was going to read one of the questions.
ahead.
What's the thinking behind making defer only work with fragments instead of fragments and fields like skip and include? So there was a experimental alpha release of Apollo server a few years back that we were working with that supported defer on fields. And we found that pretty quickly, when you're deferring one field, you want to defer more than one field. And so then if you can only defer on a field, then you have to manage the loading state of all of these fields. So you don't want like 3 things right next to each other and they're all going to come in at different times and push the page around. So you probably want to wait for all 3 of them to come in before you don't show that your single loading indicator and put the whole thing there. So fragments makes it a lot easier to work with that. And so it's also, we kind of expect the path that you're going to want to defer more than one field. So it's easy enough to just wrap an inline fragment if you ever do want one field, but then you could always like expand a lot easier when if you start with a fragment to begin with.
Yeah, there's also kind of a technical aspect of how the payloads are delivered, which is that you're sort of, and I think actually there's like an issue where this is being discussed that I wrote down an example of like there's some actually like edge cases of like things that you might do where it's like it's not obvious what the response payload should be or how you should handle those cases. And so basically by putting defer only on fragments, what it means is the path that you get in the response is basically saying at this path, here's some extra data you can basically spread into like the data that you already have. And that like really simplifies like the response handling. So it just makes it a bit more clear. So yeah, kind of given like the technical aspect and then also the fact that like from a use case perspective, you're really only gonna, I think, practically want to use this on fragments. It kind of seems like a reasonable limitation to have.
Oh, interesting, Joe. I didn't know there was like a technical complication because I thought we could add it to fields, but it's interesting that there's some kind of technical complexity that we're avoiding. We figured it was like kind of best practice too, just like managing a bunch of loading states would be, I don't know, you could have people just write a lot of funky code that puts up all these spinners if you just have all these fields deferring separately.
Yeah, definitely. I think like totally. That's I think a more like practical concern. But there is like, it was interesting, like kind of thinking about how it worked technically. It's certainly possible to make it work on fields. It makes it a little bit simpler that you kind of always, you can just always spread the data as opposed to like, oh wait, which case am I in? And then you have to do something different. So.
Ah, interesting.
So we have another question from the chat that I think we've partially answered, but how do you measure what should be deferred? Anyone have an obvious answer to that?
Yeah, actually,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I would just say really briefly, like actually start with like, what is your loading sequence? Like what loading sequence do you want to have on the page? And then just put defers there and then like, and then do a test to see like, does deferring it actually make a noticeable difference? But really, if like, you probably want to think about your design. You want to think about what the loading sequence should be. You should put suspense boundaries at the points where you're okay having okay rendering, without that content, and then put a defer there and, see. Go ahead.
Anything to add, Liliana? Or?
Yeah, just for us, there was like specifically some pain points we had. We have like this internal dev tool we use that like shows our waterfall. So like specifically the endpoints that are taking longer than the others. So for us, that was kind of a combination of like things that aren't in the critical path, and then also just endpoints that are kind of slowing that main query down. Those were the first ones we targeted.
Right. So I guess it's not as simple as saying always like defer your slow fields. It's more about, as usual, about the actual UI.
Yeah, because there's also tracing it back to like, okay, this endpoint comes from this fragment. All right, what specifically in this fragment is slow? And then sometimes it's only specific use cases, like when a user has like some amount of transaction or maybe even like a specific type of notification. So there's definitely just figuring out if once you add defer, like, did it actually change anything? Is it improving anything? Yeah.
So Joe, you mentioned there's been a long journey for Defer. Is there anything you want to dig into a bit?
I mean, I could tell the story of Defer. I just think it's, well, I will just briefly mention what is kind of interesting is that we actually had Defer working. We didn't have Stream implemented, but we had, well, we kind of did, but not really. But we had Defer implemented in Relay Classic. And basically we were like kind of at runtime would like, traverse the query structure, find points where you'd call Defer, split them off into their own like query, and send them in a way that was non-blocking. But obviously that meant like doing a bunch of work at runtime. And so I think the great part about getting this into the spec is that now it kind of makes it easy for, anyone. At first it makes it easy for anyone to do this, but also it's kind of making it possible to, the way that we were splitting off those queries, like it relied on this custom batch query protocol that we had on the server. And so that meant that it was like very much like a Relay specific technology. And it also meant that it really, even though it was in Relay open source, like you couldn't practically use it outside of Facebook just because no one was going to have a server that spoke that batch protocol. But this makes it just like a lot easier for anyone to, hopefully once it's in the spec, all the GraphQL servers will implement it. And then anyone who's using it will be able to benefit. So yeah, just great to, I'm really happy that Rob and Liliana have pushed this forward because we were primarily focusing on our internal use case, but the code was open source, and so there we go. You didn't mention the part about reverse engineering the protocol from the Relay code base, but that was.
Oh yeah, we spent a lot of time looking at those unit tests.
So much time searching for Defer and Stream, and unit. You guys write some great unit tests over at Facebook.
Welcome. Yeah, that was really cool.
So speaking about Stream, Joe, could you mention like how do you typically use Stream at Facebook, like, and how are you approaching it?
Yeah, so we have many products that have a feed experience, right? Like news feed, you go to a person's profile page, you see their timeline feed, a group, again like feed of the group posts, and the thing there is like those posts are usually like they take up a lot of screen space, right? It's not like you're not talking about dozens of posts all fitting in one screen, talking about like depending on the size of your monitor, 1 or 2 or maybe 3, so being able to show just one post can mean that you've actually filled up the viewport for the most part, and have given really shown the user a complete you can kind of say, okay, like we've like finished rendering the page, right? But at the same time, the user might then start scrolling, and so you don't want to have to delay, right? So you don't want to, like, if you could complete rendering a page by just getting one piece of data, ideally you would, but you don't want to do that at the expense of slowing down the second item. And so Stream is like, again, what allows you to do that. So Stream is really just Defer for lists. I think is like a simple way to think about it. And so by streaming and saying initial count 1, we're going to get that first item back as part of our initial response, and not delay that at all. But then we don't have to block that initial response on the second items, but they still start showing up as fast as possible. So I think it's good for those types of experiences. But not every list will benefit. If you're showing like, I don't know, like a list of people coming to this event, because I'm looking at the Meetup page, right? Like, and that's like, takes up visually a small amount of space on the screen. And you're just going to show like the top 5 people or something. Then it doesn't really make sense to stream that, because like, why do you want to show just one and have like, it just looks odd, right? Causes the page to move around, things like that. So you have to kind of think carefully, but for some use cases, it can be beneficial.
I guess one thing that I think made it click a lot for me as well is that you got to think about it as of like the items themselves need to kind of be dependent on other things for it to really be efficient. As in that one single item, like if you fetch a list of 10 people and the server, the thing that resolves that list gives you all the data you need, like there's no real point in delaying everything. But if that in turn fetches a bunch of stuff dependent on that, that's where it really shines, is my impression.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so for example, for us, there's there's a few things. There's calculating the items. So that's another thing to consider is like how your server implementation works. So if you can compute which items to show and all the data about them, as nearly as quickly for 10 items as you can for one, then Stream probably won't give you much of an advantage unless just the data is like so big that actually it makes sense to just like stream them down incrementally, just because the actual the transfer time takes can still not be instantaneous. But I think sometimes for our case we might say like, oh, we know like what the items are, but then there's still like a bunch of computational work, like can you see this item, can you see that item, can you see all of the things within it, things like that. And so that can take time. And so it really depends. Like there can be different things, like computing data about the item can be slow, computing the items, which items to show can be slow. In that case, you might want to like change the implementation. So you like return in like an async iterator instead of returning just like like an async. You can return like an async array, or you can return an async iterator. Async iterator lets you kind of like go one at a time and like not slow down based on the subsequent items.
So in those lists, do you typically use it to, like you said, you initial items 1 basically, and then the next payload, like how big would that typically be in a list? Would you just to get that one item usually, or?
Yeah, so I think right now I would I don't want to say always, because like there's like almost always an exception, but like I think for the most part, it's, at least for the cases that I'm familiar with that are using Relay, it is usually like initial count of 1. Sometimes maybe like initial count 0, where you're actually okay showing an empty list at first. Like the one advantage there being like you might like en bloc rendering of like content around the list, even if you don't actually ever show that state. It can actually be beneficial to let React start like rendering some stuff extra. So that's a consideration. And then I think in terms of after that, I think for the most part we're returning one item at a time. Although I think we do have an ability to return batches as well. Yeah.
Right.
So if we happen to get 2 items that come in like really quickly, we can like just flush them together.
Yeah, but typically it's very much one item coming in. Yeah, as soon as they can. Cool.
And React has a suspense list feature that allows you to kind of make sure that items are getting revealed in top-down order. Because one thing that can happen is you get, item number 2, item number 3, but then maybe like an image or something within item 2 is taking a long time to load, and so 3 is actually ready before 2. And suspense list will ensure that item 3 doesn't show before 2. So that's another thing to consider if you're using Stream, is to make sure, you probably want to use suspense list if you're using other suspense features.
So Robin, Liliana, how about first tips? Do you have, I can imagine you have a lot of lists. Do you have a lot of use cases as well for Stream, or?
So we haven't been using this one on prod yet. We've been messing around with doing it on our it's an e-commerce site, our search browse page. It's kind of a lot of items, so I think we wanted like an initial count of 12 or something, because you have like a grid of 3x3 or 3x4, and then the rest of them to come in later. We were testing it a little bit. Our backend is gRPC, so that supports streaming as well. So getting that streamed all the way through from gRPC to GraphQL to the client.
Nice. So we have another question from the chat, or we have 2 questions actually. One that's, I guess, is mainly for you here. Is there any ETA for experimental to get into the main branch? I guess, releasing the experimental, making it stable.
I think it's on our list of things to try to do in the first half of next year. It's like a tentative time frame, which is obviously not a very exact time frame, but on our list for early next year. Yeah.
Nice. And I think we've discussed this before with John last time maybe, but are you dependent on waiting for React to release concurrent mode stable first?
So we're not blocked on it. I think Yeah, I think Juan Tejada on our team knows like the exact details of what we're blocked on, and I'm probably going to say this incorrectly, but I think we're not really blocked on anything other than like we probably want to have like a pure dependency on like the stable release once it comes out type thing. And I think there's like a couple features that don't like you won't get as good of like a UX if you're using Relay Experimental with like non-concurrent mode React, but it will still work. The main one there is transitions, where like you're showing something, you start like you do like a refetch, that refetch suspends, and if you're in concurrent mode, it will keep showing what was on screen before until some delay happens, and then will like show the suspended state. Whereas in the current version of React, as soon as something suspends, it's like, well, it has to commit something, and so it'll commit the suspended state, and so it's not quite as good of a UX. But we are not blocked for like releasing the hooks as stable. Yeah, so we'll definitely proceed with that. But yeah, obviously, no promises on an exact time frame. But yeah, it is on our list of things to try to do in the early half.
Hopefully early next year then.
Yeah,
a late Christmas present.
Yes, delayed Christmas present. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are using experimental in production already, actually, with Relay. Maybe obviously not the majority, but still, I've heard a surprising amount of people use it in prod, which is interesting, and I guess a testament to that it's actually quite stable now, working quite well. So
we've been using it in production for quite some time. So yeah.
Nice. So another question from the chat: what happens when a list's items are still being streamed and the user scrolls and kicks off a request to fetch the next page? How do you manage merging all of the incoming responses?
Yeah, so we don't at least the APIs that we like the public APIs like use pagination fragment. Basically, like won't let you like fetch more if you're already fetching, or at least like the idea is like that. I'm actually now wondering, do we actually have a check against that? Or I think the idea is like the idea is like we offer like a is loading, and like basically you shouldn't call load next while you're loading. But we basically do our best to reconcile data that comes in. So for example, like the implementation itself, even though the spec sort of is that items should resolve in order, we actually handle like out of order like payloads coming from the server. We handle like if you go and make a local modification to the list, we'll try to reconcile it together, or actually give up and say, oh, like the list has been concurrently modified, so we're just going to like not accept the streaming payloads. So we kind of do our best to recover, but in general, you should, like if you're already fetching data, you should wait to go and fetch more because you don't know what the last item is going to be, and that's where you want to paginate from.
Right. Yeah. One thing that struck me, Robin, you mentioned that, I know that you've been on or previously at least been on a alpha version of the Apollo server, like you mentioned. Like, what are you using now in production? Is that still going strong, or?
We're using Express GraphQL. We're using the experimental version of that's getting published that we've been working on.
Nice. So dogfooding, excellent.
There's another question that I've gotten a bunch of times is about the label field on the responses, and why you wouldn't be able to use some kind of label that's deterministic label that's generated by the server, like the fragment name or something like that. I guess like a question for Joe is like, how does Relay exactly like piece together things using the label?
Yeah, so the label is, so you can think about cases like, imagine you have a fragment that is like, person, like, a profile picture, like, like kind of like a profile snippet, right? And then you have like a feed where you have people appearing as the author of the post, and then also as like author of the comments, and you spread that same fragment in two different places, and then you defer it in both of those places. And so now like the fragment itself, the fragment name itself, doesn't tell you like where, like kind of which I mean, I guess you know, like from position, maybe which kind of context it is, but I think the label is just a good like identifier for like what, yeah, like what information. I mean, yeah, you could use the fragment name as an identifier, but you need some identifier for like what piece of data am I getting here? Just because generally speaking with GraphQL, you have to, in order to process a response that you get, you have to know, like, you have to kind of pair it up with like the query. So for, and the perfect example there is if you're fetching something like a list and you're doing like friends first 10, the response value is going to be friends. And if I do friends first 10 after some cursor, the response is going to say friends. And how do I know like what set of friends I'm getting if I can't pair that up with the query that I sent? And so that's why you kind of have to be able to do that pairing. So yeah, totally fine to use the fragment name as an identifier, and that's what Relay Compiler does. Is it basically generates like a unique label for you if you don't provide one, or at least I'm pretty sure it does. And if it doesn't, we should just implement that because we can. But yeah, that's why like at the spec level, we do need a label to allow you to do that.
I guess there's also, because you can defer an inline fragment. So if you had more than one of those in the same place, then you need something, because
Right.
the path would be the same too. And
yeah, we actually don't support that in Relay Compiler. We just disallow defer on inline fragments, but in the spec it's allowed, and then you'd need you'd need it.
but Relay does generate them for a stream connection.
Yeah, I believe we do. It was a while ago, but I feel like we added that to add the ability to auto generate. I could be, if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure we support that.
Could you just do a quick recap of the label, what it is and what it's when you're required to use it, and so just for those who didn't follow along previously.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's kind of important to distinguish between like what you have to type when you're like writing relay code versus what you need if you're writing spec code. And so in the spec, the idea is like you have to be able to distinguish what piece of data am I getting when I get a response, because you can imagine having two fragment spreads at the exact same point that are deferred. And so if you get some data back at that path, you're like, well, okay, that the path alone is not enough to distinguish which of these two fragments am I getting data for. So you need a label. And so that's really what the label is all about. It's just which of these things is it. And so it doesn't have to be a fragment name. A fragment name is often a convenient thing to use, right? Because they have to be global unique, or at least unique within the query. And then for Relay Compiler though, because we already enforce things like global unique fragment names, we can do things like generate a label for you. And so for some of those values, like we can just say, even though it's required in the spec, we can fill in a reasonable default value and don't require the user to provide it to us. Same thing.
Okay.
Like if might be like, maybe it's like a required argument, and like, but whatever, Relay Compiler can just say like if true, so for as an example, I don't think that's actually the case.
Yeah, we don't explicitly pass in label when we're using @defer. Since we're using it with Relay, the Relay Compiler just adds all these unique labels for us. Yeah, so that's really great.
It's been a while since I looked at those. So.
Yeah, and as far as the spec, we got requests to make label optional, whereas it's required in Relay. Relay is going to add it for you anyway, so you don't need to write it. But there may be some other clients that are not as advanced as Relay that just do simple stuff where they don't care. So if the server doesn't get a label argument, it won't pass it through. But if it does, the spec says that it has to pass it through. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any other common questions you've gotten working with trying to get this into the spec? Or are people confused about anything in particular when introducing? I personally found defer quite easy to understand, but stream harder. But it's easier when you hear that it's just defer for lists. But still, it's quite advanced behind the scenes, I can imagine. It does a lot of stuff for you.
Yeah, stream does add. It was a good amount of code in GraphQL.js to make it work, because the first thing we needed to do was allow returning async iterables from resolver methods, which wasn't supported before. So that was kind of a new concept there. And you also have the scenario where with an async iterable, you're not going to know synchronously if the item is the last item. So, so we allow for that in the spec, where the spec could say, here's a payload with an item from a streamed list, has next true, and that's because we don't know if there's another item. But then you do find out sometime later that it was the last item, so you get another payload that just says has next false, and that's the last one.
Right. Any other questions in the chat? Oh, right now. But so, you mentioned defer was used in Classic as well. So I guess you've been using defer for a while in production.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been exposing a defer style API to developers for some time, but that was implemented in like a very different way. But yeah, we had like that. We had that ability though. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And then our native
that was like client side generated split queries, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
You wrote a query with defer, but Relay generated 2 queries for you and then sent them off in series.
Yeah. And it was doing that processing at runtime to split up the queries, and then using this like batch API. But we also had people writing. It was also possible, like in our native apps, people would write like you could actually manually construct 2 queries using this batch API. And the batch API had a way of saying like I'm gonna have 2 queries, and I'm gonna give them names, and I'm actually gonna like export a value from one query and import that value as like a query parameter for another query. So you could achieve deferred queries where like you didn't know you needed like you needed like a query that was relative to some information they didn't know the ID of, right? And so you could like the batch API kind of let you achieve this in a very ad hoc way, and like you could repeat queries, which meant that you could actually do streaming, but that this version is like more robust, and kind of more deeply integrated with the language approach. I think it's obviously a step forward.
Do you use chunk encoded HTTP for these as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, what is it? Whatever. We just like two new lines is like indicates like a chunk. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Networking. I don't know.
You never see the code run.
There's been
there's like so many layers of abstraction. Just like I just know that there's 2 new lines.
Yeah, there's been some people that are working on the WebSocket transport, and they've had ideas of just putting like every GraphQL query through WebSocket as opposed to only subscriptions. Yeah, I was just curious if so I assume Facebook is using sockets for subscriptions and HTTP for everything else, or something like that?
I'm actually not sure what we're using for subscriptions right now. I think there's been like various approaches. I know like we've used like long polling for some things. Yeah, I'm not sure actually what the latest is. I was also on parental leave for 2 months recently. So, and like things change quickly. So there could be some posts that I haven't caught up on yet. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we're using WebSockets for some of our libraries somewhere. I'm just not sure exactly. So, well, I can't confirm. Yeah, we actually have like a whole team that manages deals with like real-time GraphQL, and so they like basically own like all the transport protocol. And so for us, like they just basically provide basically like a network implementation that product developers can use, and then as long as it implements the network interface, like we don't have to actually look at the details of it. So that's why it's kind of like abstracted away from us, which is a nice like boundary.
Yeah, and implementing defer and stream on subscription queries was also kind of a fun one to think about.
Yeah, we did implement support for that too, and that was also fun to get working on. I need to drop off in a moment.
Yeah.
But, So thank you for hosting, and thanks everyone for the chat. And sorry to have to drop off early. I'd love to stick around for more questions, but please happy to come back anytime.
Thank you very much for joining, Joe. It's been a
Thanks a
pleasure.
lot.
Yeah, Joe.
See you. So I guess Rob and Liliana, before we end, do you have any gut feeling around when you think this would be released as stable? Or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not on us. As we're working with the rest of the working group. I know that right now for GraphQL.js, they're focused on TypeScript migration, and I think that our stuff will hopefully come after that.
Nice.
Yeah, I know we already mentioned this, but the more input we can get from the community, the more confident we are in moving forward with the spec. So again, if anyone wants to try this out, please do, and let us know on that issue. Yeah, how you found it.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and link to the issue as well, just so everyone can reach it. Yeah, if no one else has more questions or any parting words, I guess I'll go ahead and share my screen here again so I can show off the Discord link. Yeah, I guess you can see my screen now. So here's a link to a Discord for the meetup. So if anyone who's interested in sticking around and just chatting or voice chatting about anything Relay, basically, feel free to join there. I'll stick around at least for a while, and we'll see if anybody else joins. Other than that, I'd like to thank you so much for joining here and talking about your experience with Defer and Stream. And also thank you very much to Sibelius, and I hope we can get a good thing going in the community with adding more exercises to the workshop and whatnot. Yeah, so without further ado, thank you all for coming and thank you all for participating. See you in Discord if you're so inclined.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Thank you. Have a nice one.
You too. See ya.